thanking the issue of cooperating among cooperators in convening this session here today. I think I recall sometime in the early 2000s when the discussion came about with the legislation. And my point at that time is how it affects the little people who are in the credit union. Now we are hearing the discussion around 500,000 members in terms of the credit union sector. The members of credit union, they all have a dream. And they all participate in their own wealth creation and development. The Prime Minister of the country has been talking about private sector involvement in turning this economy around. And while all this discussion is taking place, there's another form of discussion that is happening that impacts very greatly on the dreams and ambition of the little people in this country. An impact that can be stillborn in terms of moving forward and developing, moving forward and creating a sense of independence among the little people who are credit union members and owners. This IFRS approach certainly will put a nail in the coffin of people's ability to develop their own selves, of reaching forward and being part of a business that they are owners of. And I am wondering whether or not the move towards the implementation of this come the 1st of January next year isn't a very subtle move to create the kind of division among the haves and have-nots in this country. We need to wake up and fight to ensure that the need to develop and move our people forward, to have our people involved in economic development of this country isn't stymied. And I am seeing beyond the whole question of just, we're talking about the death of little credit unions, of small credit unions. I am seeing the crashing of people's dreams in this country. And from that, I want to stand solidly with Brother Remy in terms of getting together and trying to push this argument at a different level where we'll have a discussion before implementation. Thank you.
Thank you for Troy. Okay, after.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much to the panel and to everyone present, but particularly to the panel for taking the time. At the end of the day, as we all would appreciate, the changes are coming, whether delayed or not. My 2 cents in this short time is basically that in the previous iteration where general provisions existed, we paid dividends. We are going to one where we're going back to that situation, and I think, to me, what would be a good takeaway, which I think is coming through on the slides, is how credit unions and managers and those of us here who are dealing with January 1st, regardless of whatever the outcomes of the discussions are, how do we change our mindsets and prepare our membership for the fact that, our dividends or our results may not look as we may have anticipated. So we appreciate the insight that you all would have shared with us, and if there's anything else or in any of the other conversations, any other pointers you all can give us to have our investment committees and our credit committees and our other leaders within our movement discuss strategies towards helping us refine the loan analysis that we need to have. At the end of the day, what I took from what was said was that once you have a documented approach to what we already do, then I think we're on the right track. To different degrees of excellence, if you want to call it that. Some of us will be able to put pen to paper, and many of us may need some help in that regard. And this is where the discussions are important. But we do thank you for certainly at least pointing us in that direction. And CUNA, of course, for leading in the conversation, and we hope that this continues. So I hope that when we leave, we all take to our next board meetings or our next AGMs in April and so on, the idea that we need to look at the behavior of our loan portfolio and how we account for it, and that it impacts our dividends. Thank you.
Joshua, if you don't mind, Carol would like to say something, and then we'll have you take over the mic, Joshua.
Yes, good morning. So let me again thank the CUNA, Eastern, and TechU for having this very important discussion this morning. Before I go into my few points, a few questions I put on the table, regarding the WOCU, is there any decision by WOCU, any discussion by WOCU on IFRS 9 regarding credit unions throughout the world? And if so, what is the result of what they have been doing so far in terms of their studies? I think it's critical for us to understand and get that information, what they are doing before we could, additionally to what we plan to do. My another question is regarding Jamaica. I heard the colleagues mention that you were in Jamaica last week or last month. I'd love to know what Jamaica's experience is and what their idea is in dealing with IFRS 9. Again, so we can have a discussion, a decision based on the data and information being done internationally and regionally. That's my few questions before I go further.
Well, I don't know if the WACU discussion is one I'm entitled to comment on, but certainly in Jamaica, I think the collective approach has borne fruit. I think the project has actually come along quite a bit between June and now. And I believe the 28 credit unions that are going through that process are approaching it from the perspective of wanting to be better regulated and to have the information to allow them to be better regulated and whatever benefits falling under that regulation of the central authority in Jamaica would bring. And they are progressing. But I do think any discussion, whether it is to delay or to approach the standard compliance, regional collective approach, just as a collective approach in Trinidad would make sense. Kyle spoke about collecting data across the region and using that data to achieve compliance. I think whether the region approaches a request to delay implementation or approaches the data and challenges together, a collective approach will bear fruit. So Jamaica seems to be moving ahead in leaps and bounds to compliance, at least with the Credit Union League. So I don't think it is something that we in Trinidad should ignore. I think we should reach out to understand how they've approached it, but also understand the challenges and difficulties they've had and figure out how together we come up with a better solution.
Let me just say something on that. I can tell you from a Jamaica experience that the question of how they've approached it is that they've approached it together. I was there just a couple of days ago, spent about a week and a half there. The fact is they've approached it together, but there's a couple of things happening in Jamaica. Apart from IFRS 9, they're also moving under regulation or to regulation by the Bank of Jamaica. So they've been approaching the two major issues, but basically approaching it together. And that's one of the things I was trying to drive in my opening message. Carol?
Yeah, additionally, what is the commercial bank's perspective on IFRS 9? Are they implementing it?
Yeah, from a commercial bank perspective, I think it was mentioned again by Kyle that there was very little early adoption of this standard when it became available. Most international financial institutions are apprehensive. They understand difficulties in adopting the standard. HSBC, I believe, is one which has gone ahead and one which is available now for us to have a look at and see how they've done it. But many of the banks, many of the financial institutions that are trying to comply for the same 1st of January deadline are finding it difficult. And the biggest challenge they are having is not designing a model or documenting their business, but the data. Data for most of the multinational banks is different in the different territories in which they operate, so one size does not work across the group. Whereas within territory, we find it's easier to build a model that is fit for purpose. So I think a lot of the multinational banks have a different challenge where they build one model and then try to roll it out and realize it does not work in certain places. And they have to go backwards, back to the drawing board to see how the data is different in different territories and how the model needs to be tweaked or overlaid or even changed. What some have come to the conclusion is that a group model may work for the group financial statements, but in each territory, those territories may not be compliant with IFRS 9 if they try to implement the group model. They may have to do their own model within the Caribbean, for example, for Canadian banks operating in the Caribbean or international banks operating in any developed area.
So what you are saying is that the multinational banks in Trinidad and Tobago are hesitant to implement IFRS 9?
Well, they were hesitant to early adopt. They are in the process of implementing for 2018. But nobody around the world has really gone ahead of the 2018 timeline, so there's very little that we can go on by way of example to see that this is how someone else has completed it and put out their financial statements. But no, I think they are fully in the process of preparing to be compliant.
I think a good takeaway, Carol, is Kyle's presentation was the proportionate response. And I remember Kyle showing a very simple model that was actually a work in practice.
Yes.
Based on something that he's done in another Caribbean jurisdiction. So that's one takeaway in terms of how to go forward with it.
So I want to suggest, based on the answers I've heard, I think certainly the sector in Trinidad and Tobago would look at the Jamaican experience, to look at what WACU is doing, to look at what the commercial banks are doing in Trinidad and Tobago, and collectively look at all those processes and ideas and plans and come up with a proposal to move forward. I want to suggest that.
I think that's a very good suggestion. I think you have to indeed be careful to make sure you deal with the differentials. So for example, I cannot make a case to exclude a bank from IFRS, full IFRS. It's very difficult to make a case to do that. So the arguments I was using why a credit union should be able to use IFRS for SMEs, much easier to argue that for credit unions because of their nature. I did follow the WACU the WACU objected strenuously to the implications of the US equivalent in the US for credit unions, and even they were unsuccessful. They were only able to get implementation slowed down. I presume WACU, I'll have to go and check, but I presume WACU's objections to IFRS 9 would just be the same, similar, I mean, it's basically the same set of arguments you would have heard before, because WACU was vociferously against what they were trying to do in the US version. But again, I think we have to discuss proportionality. Certainly what I think, I mean, the suggestion that I made is a somewhat heretical one. I basically wasn't talking, I was saying, get yourself excluded from the standard and then let the regulators have appropriate provisioning as they determine correctly. I don't think that's usually the way that's suggested. Usually the fallback position, and let's see if we can find a simple model to adopt the standard. I'm trying to suggest that we change the discussion frame and not try to figure out how best we live in the frame.
All right. Before we continue, it's obvious that this was and is a very important topic. There will be a need for an ongoing conversation. And I've heard the president of the league, I've heard the president of ACUP already indicate that we need to get together and continue. So I want to put that on the table, that there needs to be an ongoing conversation. We are coming to the close, and we have time for 2 more questions. I have one in the back, and I have Senator Crease. So I would want to close off there. Well, okay, I'll make special. I see the president of Police Credit Union. So we'll try to close with that. So let's go.
Okay, pleasant morning again. I wanted to find out if you believe that most of our auditors in Trinidad and Tobago are up to speed to effectively guide our credit unions to become IFRS compliant. When it comes to PwC, you all are different, you're at a different level in comparison to our other auditors. So I wanted to know if it is you're looking at our general auditors in Trinidad and Tobago, do you believe that they are equipped enough to guide our credit unions to become IFRS compliant?
I have a disclaimer like Kyle.
Probably Dwayne should take it from a council perspective.
And this is not an ICAT perspective because I'm not ICAT, right? Once you have a practicing certificate, it assumes that you have the necessary competence in order to do your job. So once your auditor has that practicing certificate, the answer is unequivocally yes. What I would say to you is auditors are not really supposed to guide you where to get to the answer. You have other specialists to do that. An auditor just expresses an opinion. So that's just for the records, right? So really you need to ask, if PwC is not your auditor or Kyle isn't your auditor, as I know you wouldn't be, you need to ask those kind of providers or the non-auditors to help you to get your IFRS 9 compliance. Your auditor just come and sign the opinion.
So just for transparency, PwC is our auditors, CUNA Caribbean, and I know they're also Eastern's auditor. Kyle is our actuary. So, transparency. Senator Chris.
Chris PSU. I want to start by thanking the panelists for the level of the presentations. I am proud of the quality of professionalism that was displayed here this morning. Good. And I want to throw in my 2 cents worth thanking CUNA, Eastern, and TQ for having this session. The problem I have, though, with ourselves, including myself, as a movement, is that we seem to be running behind the ball rather than pushing it forward. And by that I mean, it is time for us to have a strat plan for the movement. And I'm challenging the president of the league and good friend Fitzroy Utley, who I've worked with in another capacity, that it is time we sit down and get that strat plan for the movement together. Because this issue, just like the issue with the question of regulation by the central bank, could be forecasted. And therefore, we could have sat quietly in a room in a hotel someplace in a convention center and picked this up as one of the challenges to come 2 years back and been working on it, not only as a movement here in Trinidad and Tobago, but as a movement in the Caribbean and the world. Because it's no accident that you in Jamaica are discussing the same thing. That's no accident, you know. We are part of a historical, political, economic process. And if we understand that, we could forecast all the little hiccups and deal with it in quiet back rooms, rather than to have to be, you know, running behind the ball all the time. And I think it is time that, yes, we have to deal with this because it's in front of us, it's going to affect dividend payments and so on. It could, as they say, lick up the smaller credit unions. And that's why I'm glad the big brothers have, you know, taken up the ball and running ahead so as to make sure the rest of us don't fall through. But I'd just like to close because each day I'm reminded by the fact that I'm involved in this, and I'm involved in this decades now, and during that time, I'm always reminded that our forebears, the friendly societies, came and disappeared. And the only existing one of some note is probably the East Indian Friendly Society in Gasparillo. All the rest have disappeared. And if we are not to similarly disappear, the time is now for us to step aside from this little fire we're trying to out and strategize for the survival of the movement.
Thank you. Thank you. Fitzroy will be the last question of this session.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to the panel, and let me thank the panel for the information. I'm wondering, I was talking to my daughter this morning, who's an accountant, and And I told her I'm coming to this seminar, and she told me this has been around for almost 10 years. And I heard Kyle said it was around a very long time. I'm wondering whether ICAT, just like us, has been caught a little off guard in terms of set the deadline and whether there would be some kind of gestation period for the credit unions to start really the implementation. Not ignoring the date, but whether there would be some period based on all the forthcoming discussions for us to get our house in order. I'm certain that we're not against compliance at all. In fact, I think the credit union movement have been self-regulating for many years. So I'm just wondering there's a period for us to really start getting the structures in place.
Thanks for the question. From an ICAT perspective, I think the discussion that we've referred to several times between ICAT representatives of the movement and the regulator, I think is one which is overdue and can explore that prospect. I think to say that the standard has been around for a long time is not misleading. It has been around, but in phases. In 2012, the initial part of the standard, which Hasib spoke about, measurement and classification, was available. At that point in time, 2015 was the implementation date, and there was a lot of noise around IFRS 9. What then happened was there was a long delay between that and the implementation of, or the rollout of the impairment model, which is where I think a lot of the anxiety rests. When it was rolled out and the date was changed to 2018, there was still a lot of lobbying, particularly by insurance companies, that the adoption of the standard could not be successfully done until the insurance standard became available, which is not going to happen before 2020. The compromise which the standard setting body came to with the insurance companies was that they would have the option to defer until 2020. And everyone else who was hoping for the standard to be deferred until the insurance standard came, I think got caught a little bit off guard, having to implement by 2018 when, because of a prior shift in the date and because there was another standard which was linked, which wasn't going to happen by 2018, maybe people were hoping it wouldn't happen so soon. That being said, we've known about the 2018 date for 3 years now. There have been seminars put on by ICAT, unfortunately targeted at accountants and members of ICAT more than, I think, the broader audience which is here today, which involves general managers and board members and presidents and so on. And because of the impact of the standard, I think it is not one which should be discussed only in the finance departments and by the accountants and members of ICAT. So as ICAT, as a representative of ICAT, I think we welcome more discussion with stakeholders other than our members. The Credit Union League and the regulator here, I think certainly there's an openness to continue that discussion, but I am sure similar discussions are required outside of those of us here to push it on the agenda, not just locally, but regionally as well. So I think the more collaborative discussions that we have, the better position we will be either to accept with our limitations or to come to some consensus position on how we defer.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Kyle, and thank you, Hasib. Can I have a round of applause for our presenters? Can I have another round of applause for you? Come on, you could do better than that. Kyle, Hasib, Dwayne, any closing statements you would like to make?
I think I just closed.
No, I mean additional, anything that you think?
I think in closing, I'll close the same way I began. I thank CUNA, Eastern, TechU for taking the initiative to put on such a session, but I also thank all of you who have attended and participated. I think it's been a great session. I've been happy to be a part of it. As an auditor, as ICAT, I don't necessarily agree with everything that is in the standard, as I have disagreed with a lot of things that have come through the standards of late, because accounting standards have moved away from some of the historical concepts and conventions that I grew up learning accounting under, such as historical cost, such as prudence. And we seem to be getting pushed and moved around by different forces. But it is here, and as an auditor, as a member of the Big Four, as a member of ICAT, my job is to understand what they're trying to achieve and to help those who are clients and as well as others in the market to try to figure out the easiest way to comply without doing something which is impractical, both in terms of cost, timing, and the end impact.
Thank you, Dwayne. Come on, Kyle. Close. You were controversial. Close.
I would like to offer some words of encouragement. Yes, some of this stuff is actually an existential threat and potentially quite damaging. On the other hand, everybody has been talking about the need for us to work together, some of the theme of collaboration, which at one level underlies the whole credit union movement. And I would like to say that despite what may seem to be something just being imposed upon us from another part of the world, we can, and given working together, we will be able to work out solutions that are relevant for us. This is being replicated in developing countries around the world. It's not just IFRS 9, it's proportionality. I am confident we can actually work out something that is useful and relevant and manage to tick the boxes while not killing ourselves. So I want to actually speak a word of encouragement this morning.
Thank you, Kyle. So I want to say that I am very encouraged. In my opening, I talked about leaving here a little more confident. Are you a little more confident than when you came in? You must be confident about something. You learned something this morning. At least be confident about we have to do something. Now, this audience comprises leaders, whether you are management or the volunteer category. It's on us to do something. We have the regulator here. We have a broad spectrum of the credit union movement here. It's incumbent on us. I talked about who we serve, why we serve them, and what they expect. So in closing, I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank Eastern. I want to thank TechU. I want to thank everyone who worked diligently to make this a reality this morning. So thank you again. We look forward to continuing the conversation. I think we'll be looking to Mr. Remy, Mr. Otley, the regulator. And if not, I'm sure Conrad, Brian, myself, and these guys will continue talking about it. But feel free. I think we are all leaders, and no one has to sit back and wait on someone else. I talked about us standing up and leading. The credit union movement should be standing up and leading. So in closing, have a great day, and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.